Funny you mentioned karma because I think last year we tried to run some ads on Reddit, which which got taken down because I think the copy was something like, on Reddit you earn useless karma, on Fountain you earn like hard money sats. If you're listening on Fountain, top up your Fountain wallet with some sats and send Vivian a boost. I'll definitely be looking at the boost for this episode. Scream some sats, be generous.
Welcome to Life with Bitcoin, where we delve into the human and cultural side of Bitcoin to explore the question of what it's like to live as a Bitcoiner. I'm your host, Vivian. Thanks for tuning in. Today, our guest is Nick Malster, co-founder of the Fountain app, the podcast app that connects creators with a global community of fans and supporters. There's a chance that you're listening to this very episode on Fountain, and we'll be spending some time today with Nick to chat about his story with Bitcoin and building a business, the Fountain app, and the very idea and the execution of value for value. Welcome, Nick.
Thanks for having me on, Vivian.
For those of whom who are not yet familiar with the Fountain app, could you share with us briefly what is Fountain?
Fountain is a podcast app that's powered by Bitcoin. So we've integrated Bitcoin Lightning payments into the listener experience so that as a listener, you can easily support the podcast that you're listening to, either by sending a boost, which is just a comment with a payment, or by streaming sats. So sending sats for every minute you spend listening. And that's really how it started, simply just being able to pay the podcaster. And then we realized along the way, actually, that sending money to something is actually a great signal of value. It really tells you, like, if you saw a payment for someone else that they sent to a podcaster, you're more likely to give it a listen. You're even more likely to give it a listen if the payment is a large amount. So we also looked at how Fountain could drive discovery for podcasts through these kind of value signals from the payments. And then also built in the same kind of engagement features you have in apps like YouTube and TikTok, Twitch, etc., where you've got comments, you've got clips, you've also got new features like, transcripts, chapters. There's a whole lot going on. But yeah, it's essentially just a really kind of social experience for podcasting.
Before you entered the world of Bitcoin, and you came from the traditional advertising background, have worked with some of the biggest consumer brands in the world. So what was that life like?
Yeah, so I started out my career in advertising and creative agencies, and it was fun for a while. Like, I enjoyed the hustle of it. It's always a challenge. Particularly in an agency, it's very much like being in a startup. You've got a small team, big ambitions. It's very much like work hard, play hard. And, the more ambitious you are, the more you can achieve. So I enjoyed that for a long time, until the point where I was just, I was kind of getting worn out and run down by being in that sort of hamster wheel of the advertising world, which if you've seen Mad Men, it's not like Mad Men, but it's like a modern version of it, right? So yeah, it was after that where I kind of thought, maybe I should go and work with the clients on the client side. So I worked at Nike for 3 years in brand marketing, which was amazing because I'm really into sports. And actually, when I was at Nike, it was the middle of the pandemic. So, we would just have work calls and suddenly you'd have like Ronaldo popping onto your call and doing a Q&A with the team. Which is pretty cool, like just being around the athletes, being inspired by the culture. And, Nike has an amazing culture. Like, it's such a huge company, but it has such clear principles. And I really enjoyed that. But for me, I always wanted to go and set up my own thing and put something in the world that wasn't there before. So yeah, it was around COVID that I sort of moved away from that and started working on Fountain.
When we first connected, I got very surprised for the fact that you actually did not conceptualize the business with the Bitcoin element in mind. Because now that we see the app, it seems like a little bit contradictory, as Bitcoin is such an essential element of the Fountain app today to kind of execute the vision on value for value. So could you walk us through how the two of you transformed the idea from no Bitcoin element to making Bitcoin the center of the show?
Me and my co-founder, Oscar, who we actually go way back, we went to school together, so we've known each other for 20 years. We always had kind of the ambition to set up a business together. Like I said, at the time I was working at Nike. He just exited a business that he started, so he was doing his own thing, and he built this prototype for like a social audio app where you could record short audio clips and share them with friends. And I was helping him out with that for a little while, and we just kind of came to the realization that, you know what, it's really hard because we don't have any content. You have to convince people to go out and add content to your platform. And we were really big into podcasts. So we thought, why don't we just make a podcast app? Because then we can pull in all the podcasts from RSS feeds. Suddenly we've got 4 million podcasts in the app. And then we can go from there. And I'd say that it was a combination of like right place, right time, but also just following our instinct on what we thought the next transformational wave of innovation was going to be, enabled by things like the RSS feed and, of course, Bitcoin. So yeah, we built the podcast app. We started adding, features like clipping, so you can just share short clips of podcasts and see which clips your friends had posted. And at the same time was, some of the listeners might have heard of podcasting 2.0, which is just a movement, an open source community, basically, which is trying to bring new standards into podcasting to enable new features that work across all the different apps. A good example here is like Spotify. Even though it's a really popular app and they have amazing features like chapters and stuff, they'll only work on Spotify because it's a walled garden. So they were introducing a specification that allowed all these new features to be built in an open way, which we thought was really cool. And one of those features was value for value. So the specification was, you basically put a small bit of code in the podcaster's RSS feed that says, hey, I've got a Bitcoin Lightning wallet. If you send a payment to me from any of these apps, the money's going to go to my wallet. And so we integrated value for value. We were part of the first couple of apps to do so. And that's when we kind of really saw the opportunity. I think we originally saw it as the opportunity for like, hey, we're going to solve a common problem for creators so they can get paid fairly for their work. And we then kind of realized, like I said, there's so much more you can do with it in terms of, using that to drive discovery, to build engagement with communities, and also to, not just reward the creators, but listeners as well, because they play a massive part in the ecosystem for content, So yeah, that's kind of how it started.
You work with Oscar, which is you go way back. What is it like to work with someone as co-founders for someone you've known for years and years and years?
Yeah, it's great because we know each other very well. So that's a real positive. I think that lots of founders are told that they need a co-founder to start a business and maybe don't have the right person in mind. So they have to basically go out and go kind of co-founder dating and find the right people, which always comes with a risk. But, I know Oscar very well. And I think the good thing about us is that we have very different but complementary skill sets. He's very much on the technical side, as a developer and engineer, and I'm very much on the marketing and community side. So yeah, we worked well together, and yeah, it's been great. I think, it definitely changes your friendship, but I think it actually makes your friendship stronger, because it adds a different dimension to it, a dimension that's really built on trust.
When you're starting a business, it's so important to pick a co-founder. It's just like picking a partner in a marriage, right? You have to work through a lot of things and there's going to be disagreements. So it's good that both of you have different area of focus, it seems like. So how does the decision-making process looks like at Fountain? Does Oscar make all of the technical decisions and you make all the marketing decisions because you know the best?
It's kind of really based on trust, there's only so much I can input on the technical stuff. And obviously, as we know, Bitcoin is super technical, as is, podcasting and RSS feeds and how that works. So it has to be a relationship built on trust. And that's worked really well for us so far. I think the difficult thing when you have two co-founders is, it's really hard to get a majority consensus on something, because it's very easy to fall into, okay, I think we should do this, and the other person's like, I don't think that's a good idea. So you have to be really good at reasoning with each other and backing up your ideas. But ultimately, like, everything we're doing is an experiment. So we do just like to take risks, because that's the only way we're really going to create new things.
True, true. And how would you define value for value?
It's been defined by certain people as, a lifestyle, and I think it is a lifestyle. And I think this is why value for value really fits with the Bitcoin mindset. And just to be clear, like, value for value goes back a long time. It's not a new thing. um, you might remember a Radiohead album that came out in the mid 2000s called In Rainbows, where they put the album out for free, I think 2 weeks ahead of the launch of the CD and the digital copy. And they just said, pay what you want. And that was a really interesting experiment, because I got that at the time, and I think I ended up paying like 1 cent. I was like, I'm just going to get it for free, basically, because, I'm cheap. But yeah, if you look at the stats, like, they actually made more in the sales in 2 weeks before they released the CD and the digital copy than they did from their previous album. So it clearly works. And Adam Curry, who's, one of the pioneers behind this whole value for value and podcasting 2.0 movement, he started a podcast called No Agenda with John Dvorak, I think like 15 years ago. And they've been relying completely on donations from listeners right from the very beginning. And I think what's really important, and this is where it comes into a lifestyle thing, is like, it's not just about sending money and showing that, through payments, showing appreciation through payments. They define it as time, talent, and treasure. And obviously the money is the treasure part, but the time and the talent part is equally as important, because, as a creator, it's really hard work. You have so much to do, and you're always trying to get ahead. You've got so many different channels to manage. You've got to like prepare for the content. You've got to shoot it. You've got to edit it. You've got to distribute it.
That. Yeah.
Yeah. So like, it's a lot of work. So they really pioneered this idea of kind of crowdsourcing their podcast, and it's been hugely successful. Like, one example of that is they have this No Agenda artwork generator where fans can submit artwork for episodes and they get used in the future. So, the whole thing is crowdsourced. And I think for me, that's really what value for value is. It's not just about sending money in the opposite direction for the value, that you're getting in return. It's really about thinking about what value can I bring holistically to this thing I really want to support. And yeah, I think, like I said, that works really, really well with Bitcoiners, because they just have this understanding, I think, of value and the definition of value that maybe, the layperson might not.
I didn't know that value for value was fairly an old term. Like, I thought it was something that's fairly new, actually, because I've only heard of it from the room of Bitcoin, like, very much, and even more so after Fountain has been around. For whatever reason, it makes me think of bartering. It makes me think of exchanging exactly what I have with what you have, what I need
Exactly.
versus what you need.
Value for value, we believe, has the opportunity to have, mainstream scale and adoption. But I think that, the very term itself, value for value, is confusing to some people.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe we need to find a better phrase to really summarize what it means. And I think, again, the same thing can be found in Bitcoin as well. There's so much complexity in Bitcoin that, we need to try and find, more accessible terminology to give, the everyday person that understanding of what we're talking about, so they can come into our world.
If we compare to the model of value for value versus the status quo, how do you think creators and listeners in the podcast context are incentivized differently under these two models?
Yeah, that's a really good question. One thing I think that's been blatantly obvious to us, particularly when you look at YouTube, which has kind of become one of the main players in podcasting. A lot of the biggest podcasts in the world exist solely on YouTube. A lot of the biggest podcasts in the world, such as Joe Rogan, grew because of YouTube and channels like TikTok. So we aren't just talking about, podcasts as in RSS feeds. But if you look at YouTube, and this also happens on TikTok as well, is that creators are optimizing their content to really fit into the algorithms of that platform, which is why on YouTube you have so many videos which are 15 minutes long when they only needed to be 2 minutes. Or, they repeat certain sections time and time again. There's all this work that goes into like complying with the algorithm. And I think that really comes at the cost of the quality of the content and the experience that the listener or the viewer has. When it comes to advertising, This isn't true in all cases, but a lot of podcasters will agree that, if you do have sponsored ad reads in your podcast, you're kind of beholden to their requests and their kind of principles or ethics, which I think is, can get quite complicated. You can't really have true freedom of speech if someone is sponsoring your podcast, because you really have to, say the things that they want to say or not say the things they don't want to say. And again, that comes at a compromise to the quality of the podcast and to the listener. Where value for value is different is, you're really just optimizing towards delivering value for the listener. You don't have any other distractions. Okay, as a podcaster, you might also have revenue coming in from ads or anything else, but that really works alongside value for value. But if you're really focusing on optimizing for value for the listener, then everyone benefits from that.
Mm-hmm. And how about for the listeners?
Yeah, the listeners is really interesting because, if you think about the apps that you use every day, things like Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube, TikTok, Snapchat, these platforms wouldn't be worth anything without the time that we spend on them, whether that's creating content, sharing content, watching ads, all of these things, that we do on these platforms and we don't get rewarded for it. And I think what's really interesting when you're looking at this from a creator's point of view is, your listeners are the best people to go and share your content and take it to new audiences, because they're the ones who are really passionate and want to see you succeed. So if we can give listeners the tools to be able to share it, like, clips and playlists and things like that, but also give them the incentive to do it, then that suddenly creates like an ecosystem where, the listeners kind of become the marketing department for the podcaster or the creator, because they're incentivized to go and take their work out into new places. So yeah, like for example, on Fountain, if you send a boost or you create a clip or you make a playlist and someone else likes it, they're sending you sats. So like I said, it's kind of an economy within itself. And that, benefits the listener because they get rewarded, but it also benefits the podcaster because that social interaction gets cast out through the app and gets discovered by other people.
Mm-hmm. What I also like about being able to clip, it's also the fact that as listeners, you get to be a part of co-creation. I do believe we're entering in an age of co-creation, especially with the movement of value for value. If listeners become part of the show and be able to find gold nuggets and then clip them out and distribute it themselves, then it feels like they're part of the creation process. It grows your emotional closeness towards the creator as well. And
100%.
it's the building of the community where you share the same vision, and it's not about me being a fan, you being a podcaster. Is we are in this together, and I'm behind you on this mission, or I'm behind you on this content, and I'm actively doing my part to speak my truth, sort of thing. So I can definitely see there's a adaption happening that are enabled by tools like Fountain and structures like value for value.
Definitely. And I think a really important part of co-creation is actually feedback. As a creator, if you're publishing your podcast so that, your listeners are listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, the traditional podcast apps, you really don't get much feedback from users, from your listeners.
That's true.
And, obviously you see your download metrics, but they don't really tell you a lot. They don't really tell you how much that person, liked the content or how long they listened for, how engaged they are. And I think that's what value for value does. It gives you that feedback signal from the listener to the podcaster, not just in monetary terms, but also, in the act they've taken off the back of that, whether that's creating a clip or a playlist. Like you mentioned, if you give your podcast out to your listeners and you ask them to create clips of their best moments, you're going to get something very different to maybe than what you would have done yourself as a creator.
Yeah.
And you also have different, modes of interactivity with listeners that you didn't have before. Even just being able to, to comment and reply and, have direct conversations with fans and let them talk amongst themselves. You can use that to enhance the quality of your content because it delivers a better experience, but it also it gives you really great insights on what people are clicking with and what you could do, or which guest you could have on next, or, a question that they had that you should maybe do another episode on. So yeah, feedback is really important.
Love it. I personally attest to that because, well, you're on a podcast, you're on my podcast, and my podcast is on Fountain too, and it's pretty much everywhere in all of the places that we literally just mentioned. I get zero feedback from apps like Apple Podcast or Spotify, and I have people reach out to me on Twitter from time to time, just DMing me, sharing their feedback of the show. That's like pretty much the only place besides Fountain. And then I see Fountain on the show. People boosted certain episodes. People clipped out some parts where it resonated with them, which gave me a great insight of what is the type of content that people are interested in. So I can work towards that direction more often. So it creates a sounding board for forming ideas, validating ideas, and communicating with your audience. So there's the emotional flow that comes with it to bring everybody closer together in the community. So that's definitely one thing I really do appreciate about Fountain. And the other question I wanted to ask you, sort of for myself, because there's so many podcasts out there. There's, even if you just look at Bitcoin podcasts, oh my God, there's so many, even just Bitcoin podcasts out there. So under a value for value model, of course, you need to be providing value for the listeners to be rewarded or to earn people's trust. How do podcasters stand out to provide that value?
When it comes to, how to build a successful value for value community through an app like Fountain, there's a couple of things. Firstly is actually talking to your listeners about Fountain. And this can be done in like a really easy way. A lot of podcasts will have a section at the beginning or the end where they talk about, if you want to support this podcast, please like us on Twitter, or, give us a thumbs up or rating and review on the Apple Podcasts app and those things. And I think that, just making that ask of, if you want to help us grow the show and you want to support us, listen on Fountain, send us a boost, create a clip of your favorite moment. And we really appreciate your support. And I think it is quite simple. I think some creators are reluctant to do that because they don't want to, put all their eggs in one basket, so to speak. But the reality is, like, if you have a podcast, people know that it's on Apple, people know it's on Spotify, and, leaving a review on Apple Podcasts isn't going to help you really. And I think that's why we made Fountain, is like, giving creators the number one destination that's really going to make an impact for them in terms of growth, community, and monetization. So I think, asking your listeners to partake is important, but I think also getting them involved and building engagement. So a lot of the most successful podcasts on Fountain read out the comments and the boosts from their listeners at the end of every episode. And that's great because it kind of creates a sense of FOMO. Like, for everyone else who's not supporting, like, I know that if I send Vivian a boost, that she's going to read out my comment and respond to it and probably have something interesting to say. That's going to make me feel good, but it's also going to make everyone else who's listening be like, hey, I want that for myself as well, I think a really good example is Rabbit Hole Recap from Marty Bent and Odell. They do that at the end of every episode. They just read out like, hey, Stimmy sent 100,000 sats and said, love this, that and the other. And it's a great source of content. It's a source of content in itself, which is really, really cool. And then, I think other than that, just it's, thinking about like what your goal is with value for value, because I mentioned those three things: growth, engagement, monetization. Not all creators care about those three things. Some creators on Fountain just really care about monetization. They see value for value and Fountain as, another income source for them. So their call to action is going to be, hey, send us a boost, like stream us some sats. Others really think about it as a community. So they're going to be saying, let us know what you think, like send a comment, or like some might care about growth. So they're going to be asking for clips and playlists. It's really about thinking, what do you want to get out of Fountain, and building your plan around that.
What are some other least used features of Fountain that people should really leverage more, either from the creator's perspective or from the listener's perspective?
I think clips are a really important one, particularly since the launch of Fountain 1.0 in December just gone. We basically did a design user experience overhaul of the entire app. Fountain's been going for 2 years or so, and we've learned a lot from users. And this was really our opportunity to, bring everything together in the best possible way. And also like just to try and reinvent the wheel. People know how podcast apps are built. People know how social media apps are built. People also know how, Lightning wallets and payment and money apps are built. And we're really just combining those things together. So when it came to clips, one thing is we introduced like a new clip discovery tab where you can just see clips, kind of like Instagram stories. You'll just see them at the top of your feed, clips from people you follow, or clips that people who you follow have interacted with. And you open that up and it just plays like TikTok or like YouTube Shorts, and you can just swipe through them, and it's a really great way to just experience like some short form content before you go in and listen to like an hour-long podcast. And I'd say that features are a great clips are a great feature for podcasters because it helps drive discovery of their podcast, but it's also a great feature for listeners as well. If you heard something that you really wanted to share or come back to later, just create a clip. And we've got a new clipping tool that makes that really, really easy. So that's one thing. I also just want to shout out transcripts as well, because I think this is a really underrated feature. If you look at YouTube, you've had captions in YouTube for a long time. And, what we're trying to do with Fountain is, like I said, really just push podcast apps forward so that they can really compete on the same terms as some of these bigger apps in terms of functionality. And transcripts can be provided by the podcaster, but we can also request a transcript in Fountain and pay with sats. So, we just use some AI software that generates really high quality transcripts so you can read along. This also makes creating clips much easier because you can actually see, the audio as you're editing it. But it's also great for accessibility as well. You might be, you might be on a plane and you might not have any headphones, or you're on the bus or something, and you don't want to listen to something, you just want to read along to it. So that's a really great feature as well.
I tuned into your conversation with Knut on Freedom Footprint, and you shared Fountain's ambition to branch into music streaming. So how are things progressing on that front?
We've always said that we're really just starting with podcasts, and 2023 was really exciting because through developments in podcasting 2.0, we had a completely new category of music podcasts emerge. So I've already explained, you've got like a piece of code in the RSS feed for a podcast, which is called a value block. It says, the money I send is going to go to this recipient. But there's the new tag in podcasting 2.0 actually allows you to change the recipient depending on which part of the podcast you're listening to. At the same time, we're also supporting through the RSS feed different mediums of content as well. So you can upload a podcast to an RSS feed, but you can also upload a music track to an RSS feed and label it as music. So what that allowed people to do was essentially create like radio shows, kind of like drive time radio, where you're playing different tracks back to back. And if you're listening for the full episode and you're streaming sats for the whole 60-minute, your sats are going to the artist who created the track. And it's just happening automated in the background. Or, if you're listening to a track and you send a boost, if you boost while that track is playing, the artist who made the track is getting paid. So that's really cool. And I think, that we've got some way to go, because if you look at Spotify, for example, they have a whole back catalogue of music tracks and artists and albums because they've negotiated deals with the distributors, the labels. It's a really complicated industry, but I think it's possible for, to get access to that full back catalogue. And I think that's when the real power will be revealed, because, if you think about how much you love your like favorite song of all time, I think this is more true with music than it is with podcasts. Like how much would you want to like tell the artist, like, this track has meant so much to me, I just want to send you some sats to like say thank you. That it kind of really makes sense. So I think we will see, further developments in music and music podcasting on Fountain this year. The other one I think is audiobooks, which just makes a lot of sense as well, right? And we're doing some work behind the scenes already to get audiobooks ready in the first half of 2024, which is super exciting because the same things apply. You know, you can stream sats as you're listening, you can boost as you're listening, you can also create clips of the audiobook as you're listening. And I think that audiobooks had the same, I guess, challenge that podcasts do in that they're long form content. And it's really hard to break into long form content if you're just discovering it for the first time. You know, as a podcast, an episode might be 45 minutes, which is, you know, that's quite an investment of time for like just checking something out. But a book, you know, that could be hours and days to listen to. So yeah, clips and boosts and those things that give other listeners a signal that like, hey, this is really worth listening to. We think is really going to be effective.
One thing I really love about the whole concept of value for value is because for some reason for me, it encouraged the flow of karma in a way. It's like I exactly like you said, if I like a song and I love it so much that I listen to it on repeat and then it changes my life. You may be streaming sats to the artist, but you're sending messages to the universe and it's like positive message, right? Because it's warm and it's positive because it changed your life in a positive way that you want to. It changes your life so much that you have to say thank you through value for value. And I think that's very powerful. And if on a societal level we all do this, then there's a lot, I can foresee a lot more positive things, warm feelings, heartfelt stories going on. Our distance towards our favorite artist, towards our favorite podcaster, towards any like celebrity or people who are influential, any parts of the world. And if you think about it, how do we get in touch with them or connect with them remotely 50 years ago? It's almost not possible. Versus today, like we're connected by social media, we're connected with all these platforms, and you can stream sats to your favorite podcaster, and then they're gonna read out your comment at every end of episode, and they're gonna give feedback to your message. So there's a direct communication process going on, and the distance between us and the people that we aspire to are actually not as far as we think. And the very existence of value for value can really facilitate and motivate us to show our gratitude and to motivate ourselves further, so one day we can actually get in front of these people we're aspired to and say, I've made it, I've did it because of you. And that's gonna be a really powerful feeling. And for creators themselves, if they constantly hear stories of your content changed my life, or I really appreciated the fact that you did XYZ, then for the creator themselves, it's going to be a huge source of meaning, huge source of purpose. And it's going to encourage the creator to do even more great work because of that feedback process we just talked about.
Yeah, totally. It's funny you mentioned karma because I think last year we tried to run some ads on Reddit, which got taken down because I think the copy was something like, on Reddit you earn useless karma, on Fountain you earn like hard money sats, and they didn't like that. But
took it down.
Yeah, it's what you're saying about the connectivity and breaking down those barriers between people and giving people a voice. That is a really positive thing. And I think that because payments go along with that, every time you want to send a comment or a boost on Fountain, you're paying money out of your own wallet. It kind of, that's what I think what keeps things positive, because people aren't going to like pay stupid money to like send hate speech, or, it doesn't become like economically viable to spam the comments sections on all the most popular podcasts because you have to pay to do it. So that does have a big impact on like just the general like sense of positivity, the kind of things that people are saying, that does have a difference.
I've never thought about that. This is so powerful because if you think about it, on platforms like Twitter, where we see a lot of hate speech, or other platforms even, people are careless with their words in a way because it's cheap. It's like it doesn't cost them anything to send a hateful comment, and it doesn't cost them anything to spread negativity into the world. And this is very interesting, because I've never really thought about this from this angle. If you typically, if you send a hateful comment, it means you're not a fan of this, where you're like trying to pick a fight of some sorts, and you're trying to be a brat or just rude. And if you have to pay to be rude, then a lot of people will back off from that, because I already don't like
Totally.
this. I'm not gonna pay out of my pocket just to send a hateful comment. So it totally shift the paradigm of how people are incentivized to engage.
Yeah, it's not gonna prevent hate speech completely. Like, people will still pay to say mean things,
But at least the creator get
but
paid with
at least the creator gets paid.
putting up with that.
And yeah, I mean that's true. But I think also, like, so if you're listening to this episode on Fountain, which obviously you should be, if you go on the episode page on the activity, all the boosts are going to be ordered by value. So if you want your comment to be at the top, you have to send more sats than anyone else. So there is kind of like there's an economy there of like, okay, if you did want to spam someone, like, you have to kind of pay the bounty to be at the top of the list. And I think that most people aren't prepared to do that. So yeah, we do think that this system does a pretty good job so far, at least, of keeping things really positive.
When I started the podcast, I have to ask the question of, is another Bitcoin podcast really necessary? And then you entered this moment of self-doubt, and it's very hard to not worry about competition. So when you and Oscar first started Fountain, or even have this idea, with so many alternatives and huge networks with great amount of resources behind them, were you at any given point worried about competition?
We're going into this knowing that there's two big players in this space, Apple and Spotify, that have a significant majority in terms of market share. Apple, because they're the default app on a billion iPhones around the world, and people just think of podcasts as the Purple app on my phone. They don't think of it as Apple Podcasts. It's just kind of and then Spotify, obviously, who've invested insane amounts of money into capturing the biggest creators like Joe Rogan, to try and corner the market. And we're under no illusion that this is going to be easy. Of course it's going to be difficult, but we do think that we bring something very different to them, and something that they would never do, because it's kind of against their own business model. So that gave us confidence that we could pull this off.
Entrepreneurship is actually a very creative process, because there's a lot of complex problem solving that goes into it, and you have to be able to not get emotionally attached with your idea. And that's very important, because if you hold on to it to the point that you cannot see things clearly, you get tunnel vision, and then you start to want this to work so bad that you refuse to look at other directions. So as entrepreneurs, there's so many builders, either on the Bitcoin standard or not, they're trying to build something of their own, trying to enter this age of co-creation with other people and build their own community, build their own tribes. So talking from an entrepreneurship perspective, when do you think, so two questions, when do you think people should take the leap of faith to pursue something full-time, a new business? And the second question is, when and how do you know that you need to pivot in your idea, and when to just stick to it and suck it up?
Yeah, I think your first question about when's the time to take the leap of faith, either forego a salary, or to be able to get investment, to pay yourself a salary. You have to be confident that there's something there, and I think that something there has to be satisfied users who already like your product. And that's really hard to do, because at the beginning you're working with such limited resources. And in my case as well, I was doing a full-time job, and then doing as much on Fountain on the side as I could. You also have to be prepared for your product to just suck and be imperfect.
Yeah.
I'm a massive perfectionist, and it's so hard to look past the faults in your app or your product, particularly at an early stage. But I think that you forget that your early adopters, like, they can see past that. They're really kind of investing in the idea versus the execution. Obviously, the execution becomes more and more important, as the business matures. But yeah, I think it's about trying to have a clear idea of what you're doing, and trying to develop some early traction that gives you or investors the confidence to go full time. Um, and then the second question about pivoting, I just think that you can't plan too far ahead. Of course, you have to have like an idea of what you want to do, and a vision, maybe. But like you can't. We don't try and plan too far ahead because stuff changes all the time, and you can't be precious about anything. You have to launch something one week, and then maybe you might pull it the next week. Who knows? Like, you have to stay on your toes, and you can't hang on to anything. And I think, the risks of planning too far ahead is that you just kind of become too attached with this kind of idealistic version of what you want to try and achieve, and it actually stops you from seeing the signs and reading the signals and hearing feedback from users, or really looking closely at the data that you do have, because you're constantly thinking about, how do I get there?
Absolutely. I 100% attest to that. And this is the very approach I take in life as well. Like, we were literally just talking about this, that I feel like I'm this one trick pony, that the only thing I know how to do in life is I'll just do my best in whatever situation.
Yeah, that's what you can do.
What I hate it when people ask me, where do you see yourself in 5 years? I literally have no idea. And the furthest I could probably like have a clear idea, relatively clear idea of how into the future would be like 6 months, because I'll probably have to like handle logistics, and that's the only reason. And I never can answer the question of where do you see yourself in 5 years, because I literally just don't know. And I'll just bring my best self and be resilient and patient and see what happens. That's the best I can do. But this bring me imposter syndrome sometimes, because I feel like I have no other tricks upon my sleeve. I only know how to give my 100% in any given situation, regardless of the situation. And I think that's a great mindset to bring in entrepreneurship, because you never know, and you have to deal with situations and challenges. Either you've foreseen it or not. And then there's so many things, most of the things, or there's so many things that are out of your control, and you can only focus on things that are within your control. And all of the things that's outside, you have to rely on a deep faith in yourself, strong conviction of your ideas, and then in a way karma, which is what we were talking about. If you send all these positive vibes and send positive messages into the universe, then there's a chance that the seeds you're planting, they're gonna feel the force from the soil that you kind of beam through the universe. So it's hard to say, but I tend to believe this way, and I tend to approach life this way, and it definitely gives me more peace and serenity and positivity. So that's how I choose to look at it. And I think by adapting a lens of value for value into entrepreneurship, into building something, building a tribe, building a community, and into facilitating our relationships as humans, it's a very powerful mindset to adapt. Just like in the Bitcoin space, where we talk about low time preference, trust, don't verify, these are the things not individually applied to Bitcoin, but literally everything in our life. But at the same time, if Bitcoin is not the base layer, how you're realizing the payment gateway to facilitate the execution of value for value, and if we take all blockchain related solutions completely removed for a second for Fountain, can you achieve the same concept and experience with fiat currency on a global scale? Or if you can, like, how different would that look like?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. And what I'd say is that, even though, we're a podcast app powered by Bitcoin, we don't necessarily, or we don't believe that Bitcoin has to be on the front end of that experience, because otherwise it's really going to limit widespread mainstream adoption. The ideal world is that Bitcoin powers the experience in the background, but as someone who has no experience with Bitcoin, you can still interact with Fountain and get the same benefit out of it as someone who already has sats on a Lightning wallet and is starting that way. But I think, to answer your question, it's really hard for us to say because it's kind of out of our control. As a mobile app, we're kind of beholden to the rules of Apple and Google as to what they define as fair play on their app. Obviously, if we were to make fiat payments, Apple and Google would want those to be in-app purchases so they can take their 30% cut or whatever it is, right? Which changes the economics of it significantly. But yeah, I suppose there are the thing about why we use Bitcoin really is it allows us to do things that traditional money, debit cards, PayPal, etc., just can't do. Streaming microtransactions on a second to second or minute to minute basis. Splitting a payment in multiple different recipients. On Fountain, you can add splits on your podcast. So your co-host, your guest, even your producer or your team or your listeners can get a share of every single payment. That's not possible with fiat. But yeah, look, we'll have to see. We'll have to see. And this is why we say, you can't plan too far ahead because who knows what Apple and Google's policy will be later down the line. There's always the option of having a web app, which I think is becoming more popular and something that I think some of the Nostr apps as well have adopted as well because they had the same issue with Zaps and compliance with the App Store regulations. And so yeah, we'll see. We'll see. I mean, we think that Bitcoin is really the only way to do this, and we often do get asked would you do it with any other cryptocurrency or a token, or would you launch your own token? And we're like, no, of course we wouldn't. Bitcoin's the only thing that's going to be here forever, right? So that's why we're building on it, and it does things that other currencies can't do. So hopefully we'll be using that for the long term.
Right. If you have a bulletproof asset, why shoot yourself with something else? And try to make something that's less good. It's just not worthwhile. And I can imagine if you go through the fiat route, let alone the big platform taking a cut thing, just to implement the same level of functionality and sophistication on a global scale with fiat currency, it's going to be a lot headache. You probably need 3 more years before you can launch, before you get all the compliance and get all the bank accounts set up. And ever since you bought your first Bitcoin in 2020, and a lot has happened with how your routine is, your career, and with all these exciting updates with the business. But personally, have you noticed any changes on a personal level?
I checked this morning. I first bought Bitcoin in, I think it was April 2021, which I think was pretty much an all-time high. Yeah, it was at $65,000 when I bought. Because I was naive. But then again, looking back on it, I would buy it again at that price. Of course I would.
Yeah.
And I know that now. But yeah, I think that how has Bitcoin changed my life? Definitely, I live I'm more I spend less money, I spend less money on nice holidays, nice clothes, nice things, because I'm I just want to buy more Bitcoin, and I want to buy as much Bitcoin as possible, and I want to hold it as long as possible. And so, I think, I've just kind of grown to try and make those sacrifices for the long term, having a low time preference, as we say, but and that's kind of come quite naturally, I think, over time. Going back to when I was younger, that was very different. But I think it does take a while, right? I never knew that Bitcoin could be what it is to me today. When I started, I had no idea that it would affect me in the way that it has.
Yeah.
And, I'm by no means technical or really deep into Bitcoin in the way that some others are. But I understand the philosophy of it, the mentality of it. And it's also now kind of transpired as a lifestyle too.
When you're choosing to forego things like fancy clothes and nice vacations, in a way, it doesn't really feel like sacrifice because you know that you're working towards something that even better. So it just changes how you view consumption in a way. What you buy, how much you buy, what kind of things you should put more money on, what kind of things that you should put less money on. I think Bitcoin change, at least invite us to rethink a lot of these questions, a lot of the decision we make around purchasing, around how we regulate ourselves as individuals in general. So are there anything that you didn't believe before and now you do? Or you didn't do then, but you're doing it now because of Bitcoin?
I'd say that it's more down to like my just beliefs and understanding of the world changing gradually over time. I think that when I first, really got into Bitcoin, I guess I was just amazed that like, wow, all these people like really care about like the fact that our money is broken. Like I was like, they care really passionately. Like, is it because it directly affects them personally, or is it like affecting people around the world? And I think that once you start to go into, like global like monetary policy and understanding like global markets and how money works and the impact that it has not just on you and like your own situation but other people around the world, like you start to get that perspective. So over time, I was like, the same people that I looked at and thought, wow, like they're really crazy for this stuff. Like you kind of, you do get there eventually. And I think it happens subconsciously as well. Like I notice is it when if I'm talking to like friends and family and I start talking to them about self custody or something like that. And they're like, wow, like, yeah, okay. They don't really know what I'm talking about, but
Yeah.
like, I kind of check myself and I'm like, wow, okay, maybe I taken on more of this stuff than I really noticed I had.
And if people that you on a daily basis interact with are kind of sharing that same mindset, and you get a little bit of a shock when you step outside of the circle and step into the wild world where you have that reckoning of, oh, like I am a little bit different from who I used to be and from most of other people that's out there. What are some of the things that in your career that you learned in terms of getting ideas crossed?
Using common reference points that people can quickly understand really helps, because as soon as you start to get technical about anything, you know, you're going to lose them. And the thing about like having a common like example is that as soon as they get it, it gives you the permission to go deeper. But unless you kind of have that person on the same page from the beginning, because they can relate to it in a certain way, you're never going to get there.
It has to be at the eye level. Communication can only happen when there's a common ground. It has to have a common ground. If there's no common ground found between the parties of the communication, then you're just talking at different frequencies, talking in different languages, and there's no real progress can be made if you're thinking about and work towards different things. So I guess that's one thing that I constantly think about when I'm trying to argue to other people. Like, can I find a common ground with them before I start talking about Bitcoin? And we're seeing some very fancy Bitcoin advertisements coming up with the movement of Bitcoin ETF. And if you were to go back to your previous career and produce one of those, for Bitcoin awareness and for the mass in general, how do you think you would approach it?
Oh, so I don't know if I can answer that question right now. That's
Yeah,
a tough
it's gonna
brief.
be a
And,
4 months process probably, typically.
yeah, I mean, yeah, look, it's taken a long time to crack, but yeah, I don't know. Like, to be honest, like sometimes memes are just the best way of describing anything. There's obviously a lot of Bitcoin memes that are only really understood by Bitcoiners, but like, you do see some where you're like, okay, someone who doesn't know Bitcoin could see this and be like, oh yeah,
Yeah.
duh, like obviously.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, there's some amazing work being done. Some great campaigns that I've seen recently. And I think that, it's only a good thing. And I think that other companies working in Bitcoin see those ads and they're like, okay, cool. We need something like that as well.
Yeah.
Or like, we need to like work out how to talk about this thing in a way that more people are going to understand it or resonate with it. So
Hmm.
yeah, they're just kind of raising the tent pole for everybody else. And yeah, that's a great thing.
I think one takeaway I'm seeing from the few fancy advertisements I've seen on Twitter about Bitcoin is the fact that almost none of them get into the detail of or get into what Bitcoin is. So the general
Mm.
idea I got from these advertisement is you have like a really fancy setting and here's Bitcoin, and then there's this person say Bitcoin is cool, and they make it a catchphrase. You know what? You know what's the next cool thing? Bitcoin. You know what's the next trendy thing? They just don't even try to explain what it is. They don't even get started with that. They just kind of put a label on it, which is fairly straightforward and almost like butchering what it actually is, but it gets across. It's catchy. It's catchy.
Mm.
And if they understand the fact that most people out there are not technical, or they're not yet into economics, or they're not aware of how messed up the society we live in today. But most people can FOMO.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. Like there is so much to say about Bitcoin. Like, what do you say if you've got 30 seconds and you're creating an ad, particularly if that ad is designed to, to reach a wider audience that don't really know about Bitcoin? It's really hard to do. But I think that we'll just see like the same lessons learned in Bitcoin advertising as, advertising since, going back since like the 50s and 60s, like people will try the same things, apply, use the same techniques, make the same mistakes, follow different trends. And yeah, I think it's just going to be a process of trial and error.
We Bitcoiners who actively work in this space, I think we can take a note or two from these upcoming advertising to see how can we get things across, because we're into it already, and we certainly adapt to different narrative and use words like self-custody or those words that are not native to people who are not yet in the space.
Yeah, and I think it really worked in our favor that the fact we had Bitcoin integrated right from the very beginning, because we very quickly had a very engaged and interested community of Bitcoiners who wanted to explore our product. If we didn't have that, we would definitely not be where we are today. The fact that we had, podcasters who were Bitcoiners or had podcasts about Bitcoin, telling their listeners to go and listen on Fountain or other podcasting 2.0 apps made a huge difference. And I think maybe at first, like, there was a kind of a novelty factor of like, oh, I can use my Bitcoin, to do this thing. Because I think that's the great thing about this phase that we're in now, like particularly with the Lightning Network, is that we're seeing Bitcoin power these amazing products and experiences that weren't possible before. And people get excited about that. And I think the challenge for us is like, how do we project that excitement from Bitcoiners about this product to a wider audience?
What are the ways to stay close to your work?
We've got a Substack page, Fountain Substack. You can find us on Twitter at Fountain_app. We've also got like a Telegram group for beta testing new features and updates. We have links to that on our different channels as well. Just heard about it today for the first time. You can download it on the App Store, Google Play Store. You can also go to our website, fountain.fm, to find out more.
Sounds good. Thank you, Nick, for joining today. I've certainly learned a lot more about Fountain and the whole idea around value for value. I think this is the way to go, and I'm super excited to see how business like Fountain can take this idea forward and to really make that into part of our, I hope, daily routine sooner than later.
Now, if you're listening on Fountain, top up your Fountain wallet with some sats and send Vivian a boost. I'll definitely be looking at the boost for this episode. Stream some sats, be generous. And yeah, I hope you enjoy it. And if you have any feedback, like, please let us know.
Whatever Nick says. All right. Thank you so much. I hope you are listening to this very episode on Fountain, and then all of the episodes on Life with Bitcoin. I definitely see Fountain being one of my major traffic source already, which is super great. And I hope everyone enjoy the show and send me feedback there. And I'll be checking from time to time. And I'll be starting to read out the comments I get from Fountain. So please send me some sats on Fountain, and then looking forward to reading your comments. This is another episode of Light with Bitcoin. I'm your host, Vivian, and we'll see you in another episode.